I was recently asked a very difficult question pertaining to the situation and the times that we're in. It took me a couple days of looking into the topic to feel comfortable addressing it. The question is that of collateral damage. Obviously, we have the greatest regard for human life, but in a time of war, the lines of morality tend to get blurred. On the one hand, we want to protect human life as much as possible. We also have to realize, though, that it could be every step we take to protect the life of the innocent, potential collateral damage, the innocent bystanders, is a greater risk to our own soldiers and potentially at a greater ultimate risk to our country if we don't do what's necessary when it's necessary. I looked into the topic, and it's clear from the Torah, as we saw earlier, you need to send shalom first. You need to offer an opportunity, an option of peace, of course, on our terms first. The Midrash emphasizes that if the peace is rejected, even when you do go in, there's actually a debate in the Midrash whether or not you can surround them from all sides or whether you should only surround from three sides, leaving one side open, always giving the opportunity for those to flee. The Rambam brings down the opinion that you should surround them by three sides, giving the opportunity for those to run away and not engage in battle. Similarly, when it comes to women and children, if we're not talking about one of the wars that is either against Amalek or to drive out the seven nations of Israel, we need to be extremely cautious to spare them. All of that being said, there is no indication in the Torah that we should refrain from engagement if there is a chance of collateral damage, just that we need to take the preliminary steps to avoid it in whatever way possible. Additionally, you see in Shmuel Aleph that Shaul, when he wages war against Amalek, sends a letter to the surrounding areas saying that anyone who needs to leave should leave so that they don't become collateral damage in his battle against Amalek. Still, you see no indication that he will withhold engagement, just that he takes the steps ahead of time before entering in. The question remains, how exactly really do we see collateral damage not by women and children, but rather by men who are not actively engaged in the military struggle, right? So men who could participate in the military but are not actively attacking our soldiers. How should we regard the potential damage that we may cause to them, either accidentally or, for that matter, intentionally, if it were necessary? So for this, the clearest precedent is Shimon and Levi's war that they waged against the city of Shechem. Shimon and Levi wipe out the entire male population of Shechem in response to Shechem's kidnap of Dinah. And the question is, does that serve as an appropriate precedent for us to learn what's right and wrong to do in a battle? So the Rambam says that Shimon and Levi were justified, but here's why they were justified in their actions. The entirety of the city is held accountable for the actions of those who they don't properly take care of or prosecute on their own. They have a responsibility as the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach to set up a court system that will execute justice. Right? Now, that is what they should have done with Shechem at the time. Their failure to do so made them all subject to punishment, and that is what justified the actions of Shimon and Levi. Now, the Ramban rejects this position and feels that Shimon and Levi's actions were not justified and cannot be learned from. In fact, you can see Yaakov Avinu rebuking them for their behavior there. The Maharal, however, takes a third position in the Gur Aryeh, and that perhaps is the most relevant position for us to learn from today. The Maharal says as follows: it was not because of dinim that justified Shimon and Levi's actions. It wasn't because they were supposed to set up a court system and they failed to do so that justified Shimon and Levi's actions. Nonetheless, says the Maharal, they were justified. But why? Because the Torah gave permission in a time of war to wage war against the entirety of the nation. This is not a matter of a normal assessment. This is not a normal analysis of how to behave in a situation regarding human life. This is a war, and in a war, there are casualties, and in a war, you wage that war against the entirety of the nation. The Maharal goes on to say, furthermore, while normally you have to send shalom, you have to offer peace, and try to reach a peaceful agreement, that's only before we go in. But if it's in response to attack that has already taken place, as it was with Shimon and Levi, then there is no responsibility to actually try to reach a peace agreement beforehand. You have the responsibility to respond to the attack and avenge the blood of those who were killed in that attack. That's what the Maharal explains, and that is perhaps the most pertinent precedent for our situation. That being said, Rav Asher Weiss asks about this Maharal. Seemingly, he contradicts something he says elsewhere. Yaakov Avinu, the Torah says, is afraid before going to war or before meeting with Esav, which he assumes will result in a war. It says that he's afraid twice. In Rashi, there comments, he is afraid that Esav will kill him, and then he is afraid that he, Yaakov, may kill others. Now, why exactly is it an issue for Yaakov to kill others? Explains the Maharal and the Gur Aryeh, because he was concerned he might kill others who didn't deserve to be killed, who would be, let's say, collateral damage. And that concerned him. So asks Rav Asher Weiss, seemingly you have a direct contradiction between the Maharal by Yaakov, saying Yaakov was concerned for the collateral damage that might take place. And on the other hand, you have the Maharal saying that collateral damage is perfectly justified when that nation wages war against you. So he offers three potential answers. The first answer is that while what he said is correct, that there is no issue technically with collateral damage, Yaakov Avinu was particularly cautious about all human life. It was a midah of Yaakov Avinu and not so pertinent for the rest of us. The other potential option is to say that the Maharal is speaking about a war between nations. And you can even see that in his language. He does say when it's nation against nation. In a war against nations, collateral damage happens on the national level, and that's what we are prepared to. That's what we are prepared for. However, when it's individual against individual, in that circumstance, you don't have the justification for others becoming victims of your personal fight. Only on a national level. The last thing that he suggests is perhaps the Maharal holds that collateral damage is okay in theory. But nonetheless, we are extremely cautious about collateral damage because we really, really do not want it to happen. It's not a good thing. It's the better of two evils, perhaps, and we recognize that. And we have to be careful about what we give up in order to make sure that doesn't happen. But nonetheless, we're not pretending that it's a good thing. We're not pretending that it's okay. Yaakov was extremely nervous that this would happen, even if it was allowed to happen. He was extremely distraught with the prospect of it happening, because we care, even if it's a built-in part of war. And Rav Asher Weiss brings support for this position from the Radak. The Radak, in Divrei Hayomim, says as follows. So David Melech famously says that he was not allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't allow him to build the Beit HaMikdash because he has too much blood on his hands. David Melech was a soldier. He had a lot of blood on his hands. It's a bit of a surprising statement coming from David Melech, since he was a war hero. Everything that he was doing was justified. Everything that he was doing was necessary. Still, there's some intrinsic contradiction with being a war hero, which is one significant and important area of Avodat Hashem, and building the Beit HaMikdash, which is a place of peace. So even though even though he was doing what he needed to do, that made him not the right person to build a building of peace. But says the Radak something very interesting. The Radak explains it wasn't the killing of militants that rendered David HaMelech unable to or uneligible to build the Beit HaMikdash. It was the civilians that were killed in the process of David HaMelech's war that did that. If it just would have been militants, David HaMelech still could have built the Beit HaMikdash. It was because of the civilian casualties that rendered him ineligible. The Radak emphasizes, notice that he was never punished for this. It was okay what he did, but it had consequences. He was not punished for the civilian casualties. That's part of war, but it had consequences. He could no longer be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. And this is our broad and nuanced perspective on the matter. It's a terrible thing. It's something that we have the responsibility to try to avoid at all costs. Nonetheless, we see it as a necessary part of war. So we try to avoid it, and we regard it as a tragedy. But we cannot risk ourselves or our futures in order to completely avoid any sort of collateral damage in the process of war.